Ever feel like you're just drowning in information? You're trying to keep your head above water and figure out what's actually important.
Yeah, it can be tough, especially when you're trying to be, well, a good person, right?
Yeah.
Trying to make sense of it all and speak up responsibly.
And that's exactly why we're diving into this chapter you sent about ethics in public speaking.
Hmm.
We're going deep, exploring all the nuances so you don't have to.
It's not just about knowing the rules, it's about understanding why they matter and how they actually play out in real life situations.
Exactly. So whether you're someone who gives presentations or just someone who, wants to be more thoughtful about how they communicate, this deep dive is for you. Let's start with the basics. Why is ethics so crucial in public speaking?
Well, the chapter kicks off with a pretty powerful idea. Public speaking is a form of power, and just like any power, it comes with um, ethical obligations.
Right. And they even bring up this quote from Quintilian, this Roman rhetorician. He said, "The good person speaking well." So it's not just about eloquence, it's about character.
Exactly. And the chapter defines ethics as this branch of philosophy that deals with right and wrong in human affairs. It's not just some abstract concept, it's relevant to, well, everything we do.
Absolutely, like parenting, or even just shopping. We're constantly making ethical choices.
Yeah.
And those same principles apply to public speaking.
Right. Honesty, fairness, respect. These are all things we should be striving for in any communication.
And to show why this matters, the chapter uses some pretty powerful examples, like Adolf Hitler. A chilling reminder of what can happen when speech is used unethically.
A horrifying example, yeah. But it really drives home the point that words have incredible power. They can be used for good or for terrible, terrible things.
And the chapter brings it to a more personal level with the story of Felicia Robinson, this school board candidate. She's facing this ethical dilemma. Should she reveal potentially damaging information about her opponent?
It's a tough situation. On one hand, you have the principle of fair play, but on the other hand, she's concerned about the well-being of the community. There's no easy answer.
It's not always black and white, is it? So the chapter suggests that we use ethical guidelines, not just rigid rules. We need to rely on our own values and conscience as well.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, that sweet spot between following general principles and making judgments based on the specific situation.
Okay, so let's dive into those guidelines for ethical speaking that the chapter lays out. The first one is all about ensuring your goals are ethically sound.
And they use this great example of Melissa, who turns down a job at a tobacco company because it conflicts with her personal ethics.
Yeah, even though some people might argue that working for a tobacco company is fine, for her it was a clear ethical line.
Right, and the chapter contrasts that with unethical goals, like those of, say, a corrupt politician or a shady business leader. It's about asking yourself, what am I trying to achieve with my speech? And is it ultimately good or bad?
And even though there are some gray areas, the chapter stresses the importance of self-assessment. We need to be honest with ourselves about our motivations.
Absolutely. We need to be able to look in the mirror and say, yeah, my goals are ethically sound. Okay, guideline number 2. Be fully prepared for each speech.
And this was a big one. The chapter even quotes Jenkin Lloyd-Jones, who said, "A bad 30-minute speech to 200 people is a hanging offense."
Ouch. But, he has a point. Wasting people's time is disrespectful, and it's also just bad speaking.
Right. And being prepared isn't just about memorizing your lines. It's about understanding your topic inside and out. They give this example of Victoria Nunez, who gave a speech on suicide prevention.
Because she was so well prepared, she was actually able to help a classmate who was struggling. It shows how powerful preparation can be, especially with sensitive topics.
Absolutely. Okay, next up, be honest in what you say. This seems pretty obvious, but the chapter makes a good point about how public speaking relies on trust.
Yeah, we have to assume that the speaker is telling the truth, otherwise communication breaks down.
And while there might be rare exceptions, like if you're trying to protect someone from harm, the chapter makes it clear that lying is unethical. Like that guy, Brian Pertzborn, who lied about stealing money.
Right, that's a pretty clear-cut case. But the chapter also talks about more subtle forms of dishonesty, like manipulating statistics or quoting someone out of context.
Exactly. Those can be just as damaging because they erode trust.
And they can be harder to spot. It's like, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Okay, guideline number 4. Avoid name-calling and other forms of abusive language.
Now, some people might say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But the chapter argues that words can be incredibly harmful.
Yeah, they can damage reputations, create prejudice, and even incite violence.
And they give examples of derogatory terms used against different groups, like LGBTQ plus people, religious minorities, and people of color.
It's about respecting the dignity of all people.
Right.
And it's not just about being politically correct. It's about creating a more just and compassionate society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the chapter makes a good point about how abusive language can actually silence people.
Yeah, if you're constantly being attacked or belittled, you're less likely to speak up.
Yeah.
And that can undermine free speech, which is so important in a democracy.
Right. And even though free speech is protected by the First Amendment, the chapter emphasizes that there's a difference between what's legal and what's ethical.
Exactly. Just because you can say something doesn't mean you should. And ethical speakers should always strive to create a more inclusive and respectful environment for communication.
Okay, last but not least, put ethical principles into practice.
This one's all about action, right? It's not enough to just talk about ethics. We have to live them.
Yeah, we have to constantly be asking ourselves, am I being honest? Am I being fair? Am I being respectful?
And it can be tough sometimes, especially when you're under pressure, but it's always worth it. Now, let's move on to a topic that gets its own section in the chapter. Plagiarism.
And the chapter starts with a pretty striking definition. It links plagiarism to the Latin word for kidnapper, which I think really captures the essence of it.
Yeah, you're stealing someone else's work and claiming it as your own. And they give the example of Chris Spence, who lost his job because of plagiarism. It's a serious offense, even outside of school.
Right. And the chapter breaks down plagiarism into 3 types. Global plagiarism is the most blatant form.
Yeah, that's like copying an entire speech or article, and it often happens when people are procrastinating, trying to pull an all-nighter and just grabbing something off the internet.
But the consequences can be huge. The chapter really stresses the importance of starting early and doing your own work.
Absolutely. Better to be late than to plagiarize. Okay, next up is patchwork plagiarism.
Patchwork plagiarism is a bit more subtle. It's when you take bits and pieces from different sources and kind of stitch them together.
Like that example of Lexi Now, who gave a speech about autonomous vehicles but didn't properly cite her sources.
Even though she used reputable sources, it was still plagiarism because she didn't give credit.
Right, and it doesn't matter if you change a few words here and there. If the core ideas or structure are borrowed, you need to cite them.
Okay, and then there's incremental plagiarism, which can be the trickiest to avoid.
Yeah, this is when you fail to credit specific parts of your speech that came from someone else, like quotes or paraphrases.
And the chapter is really clear about how to handle both.
Yeah.
Direct quotes need to be attributed, and paraphrases still need citation if you're borrowing someone's specific ideas or arguments.
Right, and they give this great example using Malcolm X's biography. They show how to properly quote and paraphrase while still giving credit to the historian, Bruce Perry.
It's all about being transparent and honest about where your information came from.
And the chapter also warns against accidental plagiarism. Sometimes you can get so caught up in your research that you forget what's your own idea and what's someone else's.
So taking good notes is key. And when in doubt, always cite.
Better safe than sorry. Now, the chapter also talks about plagiarism and the internet.
With so much information online, it's tempting to just copy and paste. But the chapter is clear. Using internet materials without citation is still plagiarism.
The internet doesn't give you a free pass. The rules still apply.
And the chapter gives some tips for taking notes on online sources. You need to record the title, the author or organization, the date it was published or updated, and the date you accessed it.
And when you're giving your speech, you need to identify the source specifically. Don't just say, I found it on the internet.
Right. And a word of warning about those websites that sell speeches or papers.
Not only is it unethical, but they're often poorly written and easily detected. It's just not worth the risk. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the speaker's responsibilities, but the chapter also has a section on ethical listening.
Because listeners have responsibilities too, right?
Mm.
We're not just passive recipients of information.
Exactly. And the first guideline is to be courteous and attentive. The chapter gives this vivid image of a speaker trying to present to a distracted and disrespectful audience.
And you can just imagine how demoralizing that would be. So it's important to show respect to the speaker, even if you don't agree with them.
Right. And that means putting away your phone, making eye contact, and being engaged.
It's about creating a positive and supportive environment for communication.
And the second guideline is to avoid prejudging the speaker.
Yeah, like, don't judge a book by its cover. The chapter quotes the National Communication Association's credo, which says we should strive to understand and respect the speaker before we evaluate them.
It's about giving the speaker a fair chance. Listen to their arguments, consider their evidence, and then form your own opinion.
Don't jump to conclusions.
And the final guideline for ethical listening is to maintain the free and open expression of ideas.
This goes back to the First Amendment, right? We have a responsibility to uphold the speaker's right to be heard, even if we disagree with them.
And that can be tough sometimes. But the chapter makes a good point about how suppressing speech often harms minority or unpopular viewpoints.
It's about protecting the marketplace of ideas,
Mm.
where everyone has a chance to contribute.
And remember, supporting free speech doesn't mean you agree with everything that's said.
You can challenge ideas, debate them, and argue against them. But you shouldn't try to silence them.
Exactly. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about why ethics is so important in public speaking, explored guidelines for ethical speaking and listening, and delved into the complexities of plagiarism.
And it all comes back to that quote from Quintilian, the good person speaking well. It's about being both ethical and effective.
It's about using our words to make the world a better place.
So as you go out into the world and communicate with others, think about how you can apply these ethical principles in your own life. How can you be a more responsible speaker and listener?
How can you use your voice to promote truth, justice, and understanding? It's something we all need to be thinking about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And as always, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic. There's always more to learn and discover in the fascinating world of communication ethics.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep speaking up.
And remember, the power of your voice can make a real difference.
So use it wisely.
Use it ethically.
And use it well.